So I guess we're live now, right?
We are live.
And there are people funneling in, which is pretty cool.
Welcome aboard, participants. Happy to have you here.
In the chat, it'd be interesting to know where everyone's from, where everyone's dialing in from. So I'm in Denmark, well, Copenhagen specifically in Denmark. I'm curious where other people are. Montreal, Romania, oh. Oregon, USA.
I'm not the only person up early today. Yes.
There's definitely some people who are either up early or up late, right? It's the games industry, right?
Indeed.
Lebanon, that's cool.
That is very cool.
Romania, there's actually some Romanian text in this demo, which is pretty cool. That we have a Romanian who will fact check me on making sure that my friend did the correct translation.
Venezuela, excellent.
Sweden, Peru, Denmark, that's pretty cool. Probably nearby where I live. Philippines.
The Philippines, somebody's really up late. Welcome.
I seriously need a translation. I guess it's you dialed into the correct webinar then. Or the most useful one, right?
We are happy to have you, Diego.
This is pretty cool. There's such a variety of people. Like it's amazing to see, because usually you get clusters like people just from say UK or America or Germany in specific places. So it's pretty awesome to see that there's such a variety in people dialing in.
I'm in Cardiff in the UK, by the way.
Well, technically,
you get that in part of the presentation. That's all good.
Yeah. So are you going to translate to any of the text to Welsh then, Carl?
No, because I don't speak any Welsh.
Hey.
Well, I don't think I know. I know some Welsh people, but not any of the know Welsh.
This is awesome. Welcome everyone to our webinar today. We're at 60 participants so far. We'll give it a few more minutes and then we will start.
From Italy, ciao.
Israel.
Israel, nice. Pretty cool. Of course, this is live as well, so not a pre-recorded thing. We are responding to people in the chat and live.
Ukraine, excellent. That's where my family is from, Zhulinsky.
Nice. Awesome.
Very, very cool. Hello, hello. Another from Ukraine. Excellent. We are at 62 participants and counting.
Of course, this is also recorded. So if you see the webinar and you want to share it with other people afterwards, and you said, this is amazing, or this will be helpful for your project, you can obviously share it afterwards and link it and rewatch it and skip to parts where you may have more questions, or you want to pause and see exactly what we're all clicking on. And yeah. Copenhagen, nice, same.
Greece,
yeah.
Poland. That's where the Zhulinsky comes from, is Poland.
And Eduardo's flexing his Spanish, right?
I can only flex the rest, so I won't in a live webinar. Thank you very much.
I think in terms of languages, I think I learned a little bit of Danish, but it's such a difficult language. It's super tricky. Thankfully, I've got someone else to translate the Danish in this demo, which is cool.
South Africa. We are worldwide. I love this, guys. I love it. We'll start in 2 minutes if that works for everyone.
Sounds great to me.
Fabulous. My family is not in Poland, actually. My dad emigrated from Germany to the US. But the rest of my family is still in the Germany area, Berlin.
So it's very close to the Polish border. Well,
Absolutely.
Close enough compared to most of the places.
Close enough versus I am.
Danish, like talking with potatoes in the throat. Yep, I've heard that many times.
That's like singing opera in French, I'll have you know.
I do. I won't search that now, but I'll definitely Google that afterwards, after the session. Nice. So I guess we'll start in 1 minute.
Yes, Diego, I actually performed in Carmen in a small production.
You did?
I did. I'm an opera singer. Did you know that?
Really?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yes.
I
Anyhow,
had no idea.
the audience didn't need to know about your host today.
You know, we're going to get a lot of questions. In Q&A, someone's going to say, you must sing at the end. You must sing the...
He does, you do karaoke, don't you, when you're at Unite?
Oh, yeah, there was karaoke yeah, we won't talk about that. That was awkward. There's alcohol involved, yes, indeed. All right, we are 72 participants, and we are at 5 after the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Excellent, excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Hey, Singapore too. Welcome, Andy. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started now. Thank you so much for coming to the beta webinar. We're doing a hands-on with the new localization package. Your hosts today are myself, Lance Zielinski. I am the manager of global localization here at Unity. I'm based in the Seattle office. Carl?
Hi, I'm Carl. I'm the senior developer for the package. I'm based in the UK in Wales. I'm in Cardiff at the moment.
And Andy?
My name's Andy. I am English, but I'm based in Copenhagen, Denmark, in our Copenhagen office.
Excellent, excellent. So yes, we want to give a call out to some of the folks in chat and hiding here on the screen. We have Stephen Bouchard from the TextMesh Pro team. Vivian Mills, thank you for joining us. She's one of the fabulous team members on mine, and she's a project manager for this package. Also with us today is Eduardo Oriz and Christina Hogart from the marketing side. Welcome, welcome, and thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share our exciting experience with all of you. So just a reminder, there is a Q&A window for questions, and we strongly encourage you to use it as we go through the presentation, and we will be following up on your questions or during the session as we go. Also, chat for anything if you have, suggest more beta webinars on topics and things like that. We'll be watching that. And let's do a little Q&A with Carl here. Carl, tell us a little bit about the package. How did it come out to be?
Oh,
this is exactly what it does.
Springing it on me now.
I'm bringing it on you.
We started development in 2017. It was a Hack Week project. So if you're familiar, Unity has these big, huge Hack Weeks where we all go out to some exotic location and come up with various different ideas. It's kind of like a game jam. So we did a localization project, and then I carried it on. More of a side project at first, but then we kind of became official and we started to go down the package route in 2018, well, late 2017. And then we switched to addressables in 2018. So we did a big rewrite. Came out into preview at the Christmas 2018. And this year we've had a huge amount of progress. We've now got like a proper team, project management. We've got a roadmap. And we've got an idea of like where we want to go and when we're going to come out of preview and what we need to do to get to be able to become MVP, as we call it.
And that's minimum viable product for those who don't know the terms. Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, we've now got a much bigger team. It's not just me anymore.
Yes, I sympathize with that greatly, being in localization. So just a quick summary of what the localization system does. Carl, would you like to speak to this slide?
Okay. Well,
I can too. If you
actually, I'm curious how many people in the chat have actually used it, or is it, and how many is it totally new for? Because I don't want to tell everybody stuff they already know.
That's very true. We don't want to reinvent
Are you all totally new and you haven't seen it before, or have you a bit familiar with it? Okay, so it's something new. So I will explain it then. So it's if you've seen localization systems before, it essentially lets you swap different properties in your game based on your language. So strings are the big one, but also assets. We can do any type of Unity assets, so textures, sprites, audio, scriptable objects if you want to have custom like code. And we also have a system for doing text replacement, creating like dynamic strings, what we call smart strings. So that will let you do things like swapping the order of words, doing plurals, handling gender choices, It's really quite a big topic in itself. I'll cover a little bit more of that later, and some of the new features we've got coming up. It's built on top of the addressable assets system, so that's all like asset bundles, although it can be other sources. You can host your localization data on a server, or you can have it local. You can split the data up, so you can create a language pack. So you could have like a French pack, a German pack. So the idea being that you don't have to just bundle everything at once. You can kind of distribute it later on. You can create update packs. Modders can create their own packs. And it also has like a lot of a pipeline, so you can work with localizers and translators, so you can export and import automatically, and you can set up these workflows. And we support a lot of different formats, which we can go into further later. And it's got a whole load of other features as well, such as pseudo localization. We'll talk about more of the detailed stuff later, but I think I covered the gist of it.
Excellent, excellent. I personally, coming from a game background, am very excited about pseudo localization and smart formatting. I think this is a good opportunity for us to hand over the con to Andy, who has put a wonderful demonstration together for us. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand off to Andy.
Thank you. So I'm now going to share my screen. Hey folks, so this is going to be an editor demo of Unity's new localization system. The new localization system is available as a package in preview from 2019.4 onwards. And for this demo, I'm using Unity 2020.1 and localization package 0.9. So this is an example project called Supernova. It's a vertical slice of a sci-fi spaceship shooter where you can fly around an environment, visit various locations such as these building settlements and cities, and of course shoot. It's a vertical slice project that I've been working on, and I'm going to be adding other elements such as enemies and objectives in the near future. I'm going to be using this example project to demonstrate how to integrate Unity's new localization system and use it to translate various elements such as text being displayed via the UI. As you can see in this demo, there are two UI text elements, one which is static text for health and one which is dynamic text for this info message box. And I'm going to show you the steps to take those and translate them into other languages such as French, German, Russian, and others. This project's using the localization system package, and it's already been installed through the package manager. And when you install it, you can go to Edit, Project Settings, and find the Localization tab. This tab is the localization settings across the whole project. And in here, you can set up the different locales. So each of these locales are basically regional and cultural information that you can then use and switch at runtime in your project. This project already has several locales set up for English, French, Italian, and other languages from the Asia regions such as Japan, Korea, Chinese Simplified, Traditional, and also Russian. It's pretty easy to add new locales to your project. You can click this locale generator button, and here you then have a long list of all the locales you can add. If there are other extra locales you want to add that might not be on this list, or let's say you want to add something like an alien language or a custom language to your project, you can create those easily and add them in. For this demo, I'm just going to demonstrate adding a new locale, in this case, Dutch. So you can click that locale button, or you can also multi-select. Select a location for that locale to be created at. In this case, this locales folder here. And it will now create that new locale asset. And as I said, this is project wide, so you can then reference this locale anywhere in your project. Now that we have some locales set up, we need to set up a localization table. And this is going to contain the data that's then going to change the UI elements or any element in your project to different types of language translations. You can create a new table by going through Window, Asset Manager, Localization Tables. When you create this localization table window, or you open this window, you have a couple of different options. So here you have the different locales you want to associate with this new table. In this case, it's already loaded in those locales that I've previously shown you. And for this demo, I'm going to disable a couple just for the sake of time. So I'm going to translate this text label of health into English, French, Italian, German, and also Russian. I'm going to give my localization table a name. This is localization table underscore UI labels. I call them UI labels because you might have lots of elements of UI that you want to localize. So this could be like health, experience points, minimap, settings, pause menu, quality settings. Generally, these are like static labels which you usually have once typed and you very rarely change. You can also set up localization tables for other things. Let's say you have dialogue between two characters, or let's say you have locations on a map. You can create localization tables to hold different sets of localized data. The next option is to whether to create an asset table collection or a string table collection. A string table collection would be a series of strings, so text and numbers, that you, or glyphs and characters that you can then load in and use to display into UI text. The asset table is a bit more generic, and this allows you to localize assets and other elements to your project, such as audio and textures. For example, you could have a flag in your game, and you can swap out the texture on that flag depending on the locale that you choose. You can also set up audio as well. So let's say you had a character in your game say hello. You can localize that with different audio clips in either the languages. For example, when you switch to French, you can then load in an audio clip that says bonjour instead. For this demo, I'm just going to create a string table collection. I'm going to choose a location for this table to be saved in. And this now creates a corresponding assets and also a table interface for you to then edit manually. And this table is going to contain your localization values, the data of what, let's say, health is in French, German, and other languages. To begin with, you need to create a key. So I'm going to create a key saying UI underscore health. And this key can be referenced in the editor in a component I'll show you soon. But it can also be referenced by script. So if you're doing dynamic changing of text, you can reference the key and it will correspond to this particular row. Next, I'm going to type in or use this text file to add each of the different languages manually. So this one is for Italian, this one is for German, and this one is for Russian. And this is the word health translated into French, Italian, German, and also Russian. And what this table is going to do is use this as a reference. So when we change the locale in our game to say German, it's then going to display this text for this particular key. Now, of course, I can add extra keys, but for the time being, I'm just going to stick with this health. Now that that table is all set up, we need to then assign it to this health. So if I go to this text element, you'll notice I'm using TextMesh Pro to render this text. And we have the value of health manually typed in here. The localization system comes with a series of components that can help you to change this text or anything in your project dynamically. So I'm going to add this localize string event. And this component is going to sit on this text game object. The localized string event is a very clever component in that it detects when you change the locale and it will update the data and update the string automatically. If I click this string reference table, you'll notice I have a couple of different tables I can choose from. One is this location names, and that's for later on, and this one is for UI labels. We have this key here of UI health. When I select that key on that table, you'll notice that the text that I manually typed in has been loaded in. So we have health, we have the French version, we have the Italian, the German, and also the Russian. It's also detected the other locales in the project And I can add and create tables for those directly in here as well, and also in that table I showed you before. At the bottom here, we have this event for update string. And what this is going to do is it's going to detect when a locale changes. It's going to go to that element in that table, and it's then going to get the relevant element. So if you change your game to Italian, it's then going to return this string and do something with it. In this case, I'm going to point this update event to the TextMesh Pro element. And I'm going to filter down in TextMesh Pro to updating the dynamic string of the text. If I now click play, and of course I can fly around and shoot. One thing that you'll notice in the game view is we now have this localization drop down here in the top right corner of the window. And this is added and enabled when you install the localization system package. And this is a debug editor version of changing text on the fly. So this is pretty useful for in development, prototyping and testing without having to dedicate a lot of time to a in-game UI. And I'll cover in-game UI a little bit later on in the presentation. So now if I switch to French in this locale, the text element for health is updated automatically. If I switch to Italian, it's also updated. If I switch to German, and also Russian. And I'm using a font that supports these Russian characters as well as Italian, French, and any other extra characters that may come with this language. So this particular font is called Monsterrat, which you can get from Google Fonts, but a lot of people use Noto Sans, which is actually what I'm using for this info message box here. And these contain a lot of glyphs, like for Japanese and Korean. So it's pretty handy to have suitable fonts that support all these extra characters that, let's say, typical English fonts may not necessarily have. Let me just reiterate, as I'm changing this locale, and this is then sending that new change to the localization settings, it's updating this content, this update string of localized string event automatically. I haven't had to write a single line of code, and automatically I've got this static UI element changing dynamically. So that's for static text, and I've got that all set up. What about for this info message box here? So this info message box may display other types of messages, such as destroy the boss, or scout the mountains, or maybe it displays hints like use boost to travel faster, or maybe controls for a tutorial. These are typically dynamic boxes which developers will update depending on the information that they want to display to the user at that time. So combining that with this dynamically updating box, with the fact that we need to localize to many other languages, we need to factor in a nice workflow to incorporate those things together. And a lot of localization companies, or a lot of times that games are localized, is usually done externally to the engine. So done in something like Google Sheets or other types of spreadsheet tools, and then imported directly into the engine. So I have here in Google Chrome a Google Sheets, and this has already been set up with translations for different types of info messages on this tab. And we have here this key, which is, for example, info hint shoot tail, and it says to damage the boss shoot the tail, or controls, and basically different messages to display. And each of these columns, such as English, French, Italian, German, have translations for each of these individual languages, even Japanese, Korean, Chinese simplified, Chinese traditional, also Russian. And of course, there are many other languages that it can support. This is just for the example of this demo. Now, all of these translations were actually done by native and fluent speakers. And when, as a piece of advice, I'd recommend when you do translation for your games and projects, to get them done natively and manually, not using automated tools like, let's say, Google Translate, where there may be not as accurate or may have inconsistencies in the result. And all of these translations in this sheet are actually done by employees at Unity Technologies. I reached out to people from the Unity Japan office, the Korea office, China team, colleagues that are Portuguese, Spanish, Danish, and they all basically came together and were able to translate all this dialogue for this demo for you right now. So it's a great example of reaching out to people of different nationalities and people of different locations and having them all work and combine their knowledge onto this one project. So a very big thank you to anyone who contributed to that process. So I want to basically take this sheet and import into Unity because all the translation's already been done. I don't want to manually copy paste elements. It would be very time consuming if I opened up one of these tables and then had to copy paste each of these elements like I did before for the health text. And we can do this actually automatically in importing all this data in. So from Google Sheet, I'm going to go to File, Download, Save, or download as a CSV file, which is comma separated values. What this is going to do is it's going to create a CSV value of all of this data. As you can see here, it's already been downloaded. I can then import it directly into Unity. And what you'll notice is that the CSV file then contains each of the columns and all the data of that text file. And we can then use this in the localization system. Now to apply this to this text, I'm going to make a brand new table. So I'm going to go to Asset Management, Localization Tables. And of course, you can switch between the two, the available tables. So this is another pre-made one, which I'll show you later on. And this is obviously the health one. And I'm going to create a brand new table. I'm going to disable Dutch because unfortunately I don't have Dutch translation for the these different types of info messages yet. I'm going to name it something. So localization table underscore info messages, and then create a string table collection. That's a desired location. So here we've got our table empty. It's got that key like I showed you before, but it's also got each of the different columns like English, French, Italian, Korean, etc. And we want to take this CSV data or the CSV file and import it into this table automatically. I'm a big fan of relying on processes to do things automatically. Computers are pretty smart and very clever, and you can get them to do a lot of boring, laborious work to get data from A to B. So I'd rather just use that rather than spend 4 hours copy pasting values in. So we can do this pretty easily. So I'm going to select this table asset, which corresponds to this table. Notice it's still empty. And on this asset, you can add different types of extensions. So in this current version of the localization package, which is 0.9, I've currently got 2 extensions. And I think in newer versions and later versions, we've actually got extra extensions for other types of formats. Even though I'm not going to use the Google Sheets extension, I'll show you a couple of options that it does. So you hook it up to your Sheet service provider. And once you've got everything set up, you can then push and pull that data. So let's say your localization team, they add Dutch as a language. You can then pull those changes and it will then add it to that table. Or if you make some tweaks, you can then push it back. So it's very powerful if you use Google Sheets for translation. Instead, I'm actually going to show the CSV extension. And the reason for this is in the past, I've worked with many different translators to translate projects, videos, scripts and things into, say, Korean, Japanese, and other languages for other regions. And not all of them use Google Sheets. Other people, they may use Excel, they may use other types of spreadsheet tools or other types of formats. And CSV is a lot more of a standardized format for exporting table-based data. So the reason why I'm showing the CSV extension tool is because it's going to be a lot more dynamic and a lot more applicable to a lot more people you may work with externally. So when you add this extension, you'll notice it has already populated a lot of information, and all this information comes from those locales. So we have here an identifier for a key. So that's basically that key when I wrote UI underscore health, a key column. Also field names such as English EN, French FR, Italian IT. And these are basically identifiers for different columns, and it links those up with the locales. Now, if I go back to that spreadsheet, you'll notice along the top is in this top row, we've got Danish DA, Spanish ES, Portuguese PT. these are all the locales that that is going to be looking out for, such as French FR and Italian IT. It's basically going to correspond those CSV values in those values now in that CSV file with that table. And once you got this all set up, I didn't have to do anything. I just had to click the extension. It does it all for you. Thankfully, I don't have to type in all this manually. I can click open. I can locate that CSV file. Let's say, well, it's here. And notice how instantaneous that was. I was able to just add that CSV file and it automatically just imported all that data and decanted it across straight into this table. It's added the keys, it's added all the different translations. It's even added like Japanese, Korean, both Chinese simplified, traditional, Russian. It's brought in all those glyphs and characters and it's now in this table. So we can now reference this in the localized string event asset component, and also via code. And the way that this works now is a lookup reference. So let's say, for example, we want our user is playing the game and chooses Portuguese and they want to learn the controls. So via code, you can then reference info_controls_movement key. The localization settings, which I showed you earlier on, will say, oh, this game is currently in Portuguese. And it will take this string and it will return that. And then when you change to say Japanese, it will take this string and return that. So it's basically referencing a particular bit of data in a particular cell. Very powerful and very, very automatic process for getting this data into your project. So if I now go back to that info panel here, I've now got this localized string event, and I've now got an option to choose the info messages here and choose which type of key. In this case, visit the city or visit the capital city. And here, then it's automatically pulled in all that table of information to be displayed on this component. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this could be a dynamic box and it could show different types of text. And here I've got a little script which has got an enum for different types of keys, such as destroy the boss, scout the mountains, visit the city. And typically in games, you would set up something like this to say, now show the tutorial, and then display these different messages in the info box for the tutorial. The script is very, very basic and simple. You could probably make it even simpler, but it's just an example. So I've got this enum list for each of the keys. I then just have a simple update check, which basically checks to see if that option changes. Obviously, you can make this simpler and change it to be more event-based. So when the player achieves a certain objective, it shows the next objective. This is just purely just for demo purposes. But the real interesting thing here is this line here. So it's going to go to that localized string event component. This one here is then going to get the string reference and find the table entry reference. And I'm basically taking that enum and converting it to a string. And obviously you can do many different ways to do this. You could have it more statically typed, or you could feed in other types of data to that string, but then it's then going to automatically reference that particular desired key. So with that all set up, I can now hit play. Obviously I can fly around and shoot some things. But when I open up this locale and I change it to French, you'll notice that the French has changed not just for that health label, but also for this info box here. Change it to Italian, change it to German, change it to Portuguese, Japanese, Korean. And again, I'm using TextMesh Pro with Noto Sans for this info box to display all these different glyphs. TextMesh Pro has an amazing multi-atlas setting on the font asset, which when enabled allows you to scale up the glyphs and basically create multiple atlases to support all these extra glyphs for all these extra languages. So I highly recommend you check that out. One thing you'll notice is when I choose the locale of Japanese, we have here the health text is showing Russian. And the reason for that is I didn't add an actual Japanese translation for health. So it's basically going to show the previous string that was assigned. R&D have told me that this has actually been fixed in a later version. So it doesn't just show the old string, it actually prints out a message saying something like translation not found. So it's kind of the equivalent of a pink magenta error shader and letting you know that there are gaps in your translation for when you switch between different languages. So that would be very helpful for identifying, say, missing areas which might not have the correct localization data set up, or missing localization data for that matter. So we've now got these boxes translating and working automatically. Now, if I enable these map markers, what you'll notice is that we've now got a variety of locations around this environment. And these are floating UI in world space that are showing the names of the locations. Notice that they're all already translated. If I switch to, say, Portuguese, it's then going to change to the Portuguese translation for these elements and this info message box. And all this is done automatically. So these are all using the same prefab with a slight variation of a different key. And they're using the localized string events to update the text locally. So when I change the locale to, say, Korean, all those localized string events on each of those prefabs is then going to say, okay, Korean is now the new localized setting. Update that text accordingly. So it's all very automatic. You can have this localized string event in many different locations and it will update across your project. Or of course, you can do it dynamically and feed in data and get the result out the other side from that table. The choice is yours. You can do it using that useful component, or you can do it via an API. Now, all of these location names are also from a Google Sheet. So if I go back to this localization for this project, I can click location names. And for the Supernova project, I've basically added all these different locations through this key. And I've also got translation by the same people into all these other languages to use. So it's very powerful that you can have a Google Sheet or any spreadsheet with multiple tabs and export them out as different CSV data for your project. And in games and projects I've worked in the past, we've often had, say, tutorial text or dialogue text or pause menu text and quality settings text in separate tabs and had them all localized and imported in different ways. So this workflow of creating this text externally and importing in for a table is very flexible depending on your project and your needs. The last thing I want to show you is in-game UI switching or in-game locale switching using UI. So everything I've done so far has been using this debug drop-down menu here. So if I switch to Chinese simplified, it's going to update everything in the project through that localization settings. But obviously, when you ship your game, this isn't going to display because this is just debug editor only. You want to display some kind of UI in the game for users to choose. And this would normally be through some kind of settings window, which kind of looks like this. So this is actually a prefab, which I've dragged and dropped into the project from the localization samples. So when you go to Window and Package Manager and you import in the localization samples package, you get a series of samples that you can then add to your project. So here we've got samples for CSV loading, Google Sheets, loading strings, creating locales. But the one that I'm using here is this language selection menu using UGUI or Unity's UI system. And when you import that sample, it will give you an example scene, but also some prefabs. So where you can just drag and drop in and it will automatically get the locales loaded into your project, such as Japanese, Spanish, Danish, and it works as a fantastic placeholder for as you're developing your game and you want to iterate and test. You can just drag and drop it in, and whilst you're developing it before your UI is finalized, or let's say you haven't received your UI art assets yet, or maybe you're still concepting, or maybe you're even prototyping, you can just drag and drop this in and it works automatically. Now, of course, this is using default UI and default textures, and it doesn't really fit the rest of my sort of blue neon in-game UI. So I've taken this prefab and I've built on top of it. So here is basically the same prefab, but slightly changed in font, and obviously I've changed the word language to be a globe. And now I've got this big drop-down menu, which I can then open up and change to, say, Japanese and Korean, into Russian, also to Romanian. And this is then going to basically be more representative of my actual game. So the reason why I'm showing you this is we already have prefabs for you to get started with some default settings, and then you can build on top of them with your own artwork later on, as you can see right here. Another slight change I've made, which is actually going to be rolled into the samples in a future release, is rather than it displaying all the languages in English, it's actually displaying them natively. So rather than Spanish saying Spanish, it's Español. Rather than Romanian, it says Romana. I apologize for my accent. So this basically makes it a lot more aligned with your users. Let's say someone is Japanese and they open up this window to change the language to Japanese. They're not going to see the word Japanese in English. They're going to see the Japanese translation for that language. And this is all automatic using the locale data. So you don't have to implement each of these for each culture or each locale. You instead just reference, you can just reference the locale settings, and you'll automatically get this locale data. And that's the end of this demonstration. Hopefully it was useful to demonstrate how the localization system works, how you can integrate it into a project and use it to update both static, dynamic, and also world space text, and how you can implement a in-game UI to change between the different locales. Hopefully it was also helpful. Hopefully it was also helpful for showing you how to set up translation systems externally and import that data in to be used with the system. Thank you for watching. And if you have any further questions, you can ask us on the Unity forums for localization, where myself and the R&D team will be in after this recording to show you more information or help you with different setups that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I'll go ahead and share out the presentation. Okay, the next topic of discussion is pseudo-localization. Anybody who's worked in this industry understands that you find out after the build that you have bugs in pseudo-localization. Well, Carl's already been thinking about that and would like to talk a bit more about that.
So pseudo-localization is basically a way to generate fake translations. So you can test how your UI might look once you apply a different language. To see if it uses up a similar amount of space, character sets, whether you've got any issues. So for example, if you've got a limited amount of space in your UI, and then you translate to a different language that maybe expands by 30% or more, you may find that it no longer fits, it gets cropped, or it formats differently, it goes just 2 lines. You can also identify things like hard-coded strings. So if you've got your UI and you think you've localized it, you can enable pseudo-localization, and there's a mode where it'll just replace everything with like a single character. So you can just switch that on, and if you see some of those strings haven't changed, then you can see you've not localized them, you've missed that area. You can look for parts where maybe you're creating strings in a bad way. So for example, if you're formatting a string, so you say you've got one part of a string and then you're adding another part of a string together, those aren't going to localize very well once the format of the sentence changes and the word order changes. And so you can identify parts of the string where you're adding them together. You can look for missing fonts and glyphs, any right to left text issues. You can also look for like non-localized art. So if you've got text in the art, then that should be changed. So it basically lets you create another locale, which is called a pseudo locale. And in that you can configure a list of different methods you want to apply. So you've got text expansion, and we give you a load of different figures on how certain languages will expand generally. You can do things like replacing characters, mirroring text. You can create your own custom pseudo-locale methods. So if you know you want to test for a certain type of behavior, you can add that in. And this is really good for early on when you haven't got any translations and you just want to see if your UI is going to work if it switches to different languages and things slightly change. So it's a very simple thing. You could just switch, like as you would switch your language, you can switch to a pseudo locale language and just see if you've got any issues as you're going and you're building your game up. And in this example, we've got one here. You can see we switched to pseudo localization, and the bottom text has now gone to 2 lines and it's missing some fonts. And then if we were to translate it to say Spanish, you would see that you actually get that same issue. It's no longer going to fit inside of that area. It's gone to 2 lines. So it's just an example of how it's helping you find some of these issues earlier on before you start doing your translation. And yeah, that's enough for pseudo localization. Next slide. And if you want to create a pseudo locale, it is just a case of in the project, you just right click, create localization pseudo locale, and then it'll just be in your project. Right, so what I want to talk about now is smart strings. So these are our answer to how do you create non-static text. So text that's going to change, particularly based on, say, the order of words. If you're going to start to create text, so you're going to put some information in that text, so you might want to put player name or score or some sort of variables, and you want to construct those strings. Those strings are going to often change on each language, so the order of the words and where those things might be is going to change. You might want to deal with like plurals, gender, all sorts of different things. So I'm going to share my screen. So Lance, I think I could just
switching to the column.
Hopefully my text is readable. Let me find my screen. Right. I've made it as low resolution as I can, where I can still work with it. And I can't see the chat anymore, so.
Excellent, they're saying readable.
Good, okay.
Some folks are saying go high res if you want, but if this shows what you have in your demo, let's go ahead.
No, I'm gonna stay like this.
Let's do it.
Right, so I need to get rid of the zoom toolbar though, because it's right in the way. So I'm gonna create some UI text, just anything. Another thing you could do is you can also click and in the context menu and click localize, and that will also just add it for you, the localized string event. And it also sets the events up for you, so that's quite nice. And I'm going to select a table and I'm going to add a new table entry because I just want something to play about with. So you've got this little option here, smart, so you can click that and that'll make it a smart string. And then we've got 3 tabs, edit, so we can just type the string, debug, which is kind of a view that kind of helps you see the selectors and the tags. I'll show you in a sec, and preview, which will show you it formatted with that information. So you could do something like, hello, my name is name, surname. So that way you might have a character and you've got 2 variables, name, surname, and then with certain languages, you might have to swap that round. So the surname may come first, the name may come second, and it may not appear at the same place in the sentence. So this allows you to then give that information to a localizer and they will have context. They'll know that's the name and a surname. So if you were using, say, string.format, it would probably look like that. And there's not much context there. And we also can do a lot more than that. So let's do name and surname. If I can spell. And then we click debug, it shows us that it's detected these placeholders. If we click preview now, it's going to give us an error because it doesn't actually know where name and surname are coming from. So similar to C# string.format, you can pass in arguments. And here we have the ability to do it through the editor, but you can also do it through code. So one thing I could do is I could pass the instance of a class in, and if that class had 2 variables called name and surname, then it would just figure them out and it would use those values. If I passed in, say, a dictionary of strings and it had a key called name and a key called surname, then it would extract them. So it's quite clever. It will handle it different depending on the data you pass in. But what I want to show you now is a new feature we've added called global variables. So instead of having to pass in variables for each string, we can just define some variables and then we can just use them everywhere. So what we could do is we can go and we can create a new, so much smaller, I can't find things now, global variables group. And in here, we can now define some variables, and we can create custom variables. We can nest them. We can have nested groups. So I'm just going to create 2 string variables. I'm going to call one name and one surname. And I'll put me in. Now, to use this, we have to configure our smart string properties. So I'm going to go to our localization settings. Oh, if I can find them. And in here, under string database, we can expand that. We've got our smart string, smart format settings. So you have sources and formatters. So sources is basically, it decides where to get the variables from. So for example, you could pass in a C# dictionary, and then that would extract information from that dictionary, which could then be used by another source, another formatter. So you can kind of chain this stuff together. So I'm going to add a global variable source. I'm just going to shift it up there so it's a bit easy to see. I'm going to add a new group, and I'm going to select that one I just created. Where I don't remember where I created it now. I'll do it this way. There it is. And I'm going to give it a name. So let's call it example. And I'm going to get rid of that one because that was when I was doing stuff before. So now I can reference this group by using the term example plus the variable name. So let's go back and see how that looks. So I'll go down to here, and I will now say example dot name. So the way you do it is you say group dot variable. And if you were nesting them, then it would just be say group dot nested dot variable, and you can keep nesting them so you can start to kind of group off variables and categories. So let's say example dot surname. Now if I click preview, there you go, it's extracted that information for us. Okay, and one of the nice advantages of global variables is they actually have events. So if I was to go and change that value, all of the localized strings that are using that global variable would automatically update themselves. You don't have to trigger those updates. So if you want to have an integer for a score and you want to display that score in various parts of the UI, and you change the score, you don't have to then go and find all the references to the score in the text and tell them to update themselves because the score's changed. You just change that global variable and it'll fire an event that will update everything. But let's show you a little bit more about global variables, if I can remember where I've actually put my asset. Here's one where we can find it. We'll click. There we go. It's in a random place. So I'm going to create an integer, and let's call this money. And I'm going to create a date time. So this is a custom one we've got that comes with our samples. And this just extracts the current date time. Let's call that now. So now if I go back to our text up here, and let's put something else in. Let's say, hello, my name is, I have example.money. And I can say preview, and it says, oh, I need to come put some values in. Let's give us something 100. So I can see that I have 100. So that's okay, but what you can also do is you can use some of the culture formatting that you'd have with string format. So if I do :C, and that's like a normal .NET string formatting syntax you can use, and then I click preview, it uses dollars. So if I copy this, I'm not going to localize it, I'm just going to use it in different languages to show you. If I do it in French and click preview, it's now in euros. If I go to, say, Japanese, preview, it's in yen. So it's aware of the current language and the regional information and the formatting. So if you want currency, number formatting, date time, so let's do date time. I can say that the date is example.now. I'm going to copy that. So I go preview. So there's the date time in US format. Let's go to Japanese. And you see it's formatted it in the way it would be formatted in Japanese. So this one's year, month, day, where American was month, day, year. So there's lots of other types of formatting, numbers. So one other example I want to show is how we do plurals. So let me just go back into our global variable. So let's create another integer. And we will call it banana count. And we'll set the value to 1. Okay, and now I'm going to go into here, English. So I'll just delete that for a second. So I can say I have example dot banana count. So first I could say I have 1. Now for plurals, that's going to change. So I could say I have 1 banana. So, but then if I change that value to 2, let's go back to 2. It's still going to say I have 2 banana. So it's not aware of the plural. So in English we would add an S. So let's do that. So what we can do is that we can then say colon, and we can say plural. Although you don't actually have to add the plural word. It's just it's kind of a hint you can use to ensure that it does it that way. And we could say, so the first value you want to put, you put them in order of size, so smallest to largest. So we could say this is going to be the value for 1. So I can say I have a banana, and then for anything else I can say use the value bananas. So I get rid of that, go back. So I have 2 bananas. I change that to 1, go back. I have a banana. So it's just going to pick the same one. If I lock my inspectors, I have to keep going back and forth. I don't have a lot of screen space to work with here. There we go. So now if I just change that banana value, I think I'm out of there. There we go. Make it 5. You see it updates itself. So let's do another language. So I've got some values for Russian. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in. But this is this is how you would do it with Russian. So for Russian, we have 3 different plural forms, and they're quite complicated. I don't understand them myself, so I'm not going to try to explain them. But we do have information in the documentation, and it's based on a normal plural system called getText. And we are going to document it more so you know how to use them for each language. But this is the way Russian works. So you've got 3 different forms. So we do the preview. We can change it to 1. And you see it changes the form. So that's how you can handle plurals. So and for each language is going to be different, so you can do them. So for example, Japanese doesn't have plurals, it's just the same. So you wouldn't need to do it for that. So that's plurals. And oh, one more thing I want to show is choices. So we can go in here and we can create a Boolean, and let's call it door state. And we'll go back to our example, just our little scratch, and we can say the door is so when it's open will be the first value. When it's false will be the second value. So if I do preview, the door is closed, make it true and it's open. So you can do conditional stuff quite easy. And you can do a lot more complicated stuff if you want to check, say, the value of a float, if it's greater, less than. We've got an example that does ages, where it says, like, if your age is less than this, you're a child, you're a baby, you're an adult. So they can be quite detailed. You probably don't want to go too detailed because a translator isn't a programmer. So you want to work with quite simple rules if you can. So I'm going to stop that sharing now. Can you put the slides back, please, Lance?
Absolutely. One moment here, and I shall do so. Boom.
And I haven't seen any of the comments while I was doing that, so I'll just quickly see this.
No worries. This gives you an opportunity to review. So just to recap, sources and formatters. We have default source, dictionary source, list formatter. I'll let you read. So moving on into global variables. And Carl, you touched on that already a bit for what's coming up in the next revision of the preview. Is there anything you'd like to add here?
Can I see the slides? I did put some stuff in the slides, didn't I?
You should be able to see the slide. You have used in smart strings without additional arguments.
I can't see. I don't. Are you sharing the slides?
I am. Oh, you know what's happening is I should click this button right here.
There we go. Right. Yeah. So
Remind the guy lacking caffeine. My apologies.
So the global variables bit I showed then is the new part. The rest already exists. And if you saw, we based this off an open source library called Smart Format, but we've done a lot of changes to it. And in the next version, we've done quite a big amount of performance improvements, huge amount of performance improvements. So there's much less garbage. We're doing a lot of pooling of objects. We've optimized a lot with caching, especially the reflection formatter. And we've also got this new feature, the global variables, which you can change these global variables at runtime, and you can also create custom ones. So you can have a custom group where it'll say, give me a variable with this name, and then you can return something totally different. An instance, you can return your own variables. So it's very flexible, and you can also fire those event updates if you want. You can also combine the event updates. So if you want to change, say, several variables at once, you don't want to keep firing updates. You only want to fire one big update at the end to refresh the string. So you can do all of that. You can put it inside of like an update scope. We've got a sample scene that comes with it. That's got loads of examples of how to do this. So look at the samples. That's always a good place to start. So finally, I want to show one last feature.
All right, I'll stop sharing so you can share the feature. So
this is still in development. This is going to be the last big thing we add, but I think this is very exciting, so I've saved it for last. So I'm just going to get rid of all of this stuff. Close tab. So one of the things you often want to do is change properties based on the language. So the big one being the font. I want to change my font. So let's see where I'm going now. I'm just going to open a simple scene just as an example. Okay. So here we've got a simple UI, just 3 buttons in it. This is from the 3D toolkit, I think. I just need to make myself a bit more space in the screen. So you've seen the workflow that we have at the moment that Andy showed, where you can go through and you can localize the text. But what if I want to change, say, the other properties? So I'm going to show you a new workflow that we have that works alongside. So it's not going to replace what we have. You can use either way. So the first thing I need to do is move the zoom toolbar out of the way. Is go up here to Window, Asset Management, Scene Controls. So I'm just going to dock this up there. So one thing we have got in with this example is we have editor support, so you can switch the languages in the editor. This is all part of the experimental feature. So I'm just going to click on Exit Game, and I'm going to change that value to be Japanese. So let me just copy and paste that. So instead of adding a localized component, I'm just going to click this button up here. I'm going to go Japanese. I'm going to say Track Changes. And I'm just going to paste the text in. So you can see it's changed the color there, and it's added a little icon. So what that means is this is a localized property variant. That's the name we're using at the moment. Maybe we'll think of something better later. And it's got a color. So the color indicates that it has a value for this language. So if I switch to French, you can see there isn't an override. So it falls back to the default at the moment. So I'm going to go back to Japanese. So it's got an override, and you can see there's a problem here. We don't actually support this language in our font. So what we can do is we can click on the font and we can change it. And I've got a font here that does support it. I think it's that one. Ah, there we go. So now that's become a localized property. That's also overridden for this language. So if I switch back to English, it uses the defaults again. And French doesn't have a value, so it uses the default. So go back to Japanese. So you see there's a new problem. It doesn't fit. So what you would normally have to do is either write some script to do this, or you'd have to try and find a value that works for everything. But here, we could just change the values just for this language. So let's change the font size a little bit. So then get to fit, and let's make the rect transform a little bit bigger. So I'm changing the rect transform just for this property. And if I look at the rect transform, you can see these have become localized properties. So these are only changing for Japanese. So I can change whatever I want just for this language, and then I can flip back to what the defaults were before. I'm hoping to see a lot of excited comments. So
Yeah,
and you can see if I switch back, it's just gone back to how it was before. Go to Japanese, and now we've got these overridden values, and we can override any value. So what I want to go and show you one more thing. So I can go through and localize the whole thing, but I'm not going to do that because we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to just emphasize this point just by going to a new scene. Don't save. I've got a simple script here. What it is it's got 4 properties: text, font size, font color, and it just uses GUI layout. So it's using IM GUI. So basically, I just want to show there's no localization at all in this script. It's just a normal script that you might have now, or someone else might provide in an asset store package. So I'm going to add this to the scene. Okay, and now I'm going to override it. So let's say override, and I'm not going to do any translation. I'm just going to write in Japanese. And it's set to run all the time. So you can see we now got a lang value for that. Let's go to French. We'll just write in French. So you see it's doing localized variables for this script that has no localization in it at all. And it's all being done through the serialization layer. So I can change these values just for this language in my script. And I don't have to do anything to my script. I can just come along at a later date, and I don't have to customize the code or anything. I can just customize the actual properties in the script. I can change the font in my example, and it will just override these low serialized properties. So that's what we're working on at the moment. It's still experimental. We've still got some finer points to work out, but I think it's our solution to how do you deal with changing the font and changing various properties rather than us writing custom code for, say, TextMesh Pro, UGUI, and any other text system out there. We'll just do it through the serialization layer, so you can just work with anything. So you can work with custom GUI systems on the asset store. As long as they're using serialized properties, it'll just work. And it is being done with public APIs, yes. This does need 2020.2, although part of it works in 2019.4, but the full version requires 2020.2 for to show the overlays and handle edit undo and various other little bits. But the core idea works with, it's all based on JSON. So we're using the JSON utility to patch these properties in. And I can go into that more detail in the future. Maybe I'll do a Unite talk on it.
Excellent. Thank you, Carl. So to clarify, for a couple of the fonts that Carl was using, if you would like to know references for that, you can find them on Google for Noto and Montserrat.
Oh, sorry, it works for assets as well. I didn't show that, but someone was asking, does it work for images? Yeah, you can change any property. You can change an image, a sprite, a font, an audio asset, anything. Any serialized property can be changed.
So like, for example, if you had a character say hello in English, and then you switch to the French locale, you can use the localized settings either through the table or what Carl showed, the variable. You can then set up the audio file to be bonjour or ciao if it's Italian.
Yeah, you can connect those properties to tables. I didn't show it there, but that's what you would do. You connect it to a table, and then you can edit it like normal, and the values will go into the table. So you can have some values stored locally, but like for assets and strings, you'd probably connect to a table so that you can pass it to a localizer and you don't have it always included into the build.
Alrighty, so this is the point where we have some Q&A. I want to thank everybody who's been answering all these questions. We have 8 open questions for the discussion. I'll go ahead and start with the most upvoted one. And first question is from Anthony's. I think I'm saying that, or Anthony. I apologize if I've butchered your name. Will this package be available for version 2019.4 LTS? I don't seem to be able to find it even after enabling preview packages. Andy, do you, or Carl?
You got it in the slide, haven't you? It's not visible. That's the only problem. It is available for 2019.4. It's just not visible in the packet list, and we are working on getting it made visible. But at the moment, you can add it by just typing in com.unity.localization, which is in the documentations, and it's also in the forum explained how to do it. And I think we've got it in the slide as well, haven't we?
Yes, I believe so. Alrighty. Next question I see here is from Alexander. If I want to have the game in English, but still have the format of the Japanese date, could I do that?
Yeah, you can. You could definitely do it. I'm just thinking how would be the best way to do it. Oh yeah. So yeah, you can do that. We get the formatting from the locale, so you can create a custom locale that provides a different formatter. So you could override the formatter. That would probably be one way to do it. Or you can just, in the smart string, you can pass in different formatters. So you can override it. It's not hidden the way it works. It's easy to change.
Just modify the variable then.
Yeah, you can modify it in script. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So Greg has a question. These track changes are cool. Where is the data stored? If we have to debug odd behavior, it'd be good to know where it lives.
Oh, it's stored on a component that's attached to the object. If I go back to sharing for a second, just to show you, I missed some bits then. Let me share my screen for a second again. So here we are again back here, and you get this thing called game object localizer added, and you can see all of the properties, and you can expand them, and you can see the overrides. So you can actually go and change them directly in here. And you have this localize button, which will let you connect to a table. So if you want to then make that part of a table instead of storing it locally, because I wouldn't recommend storing your text locally. So I'd click that, and then I just link it to a table. And then it will just use the table values instead. And I can still edit it in line. It'll just change those values in the table instead of locally. So yeah, they're stored locally. And if I wanted to say, just stop it, I wanted to remove it, I changed my mind, I could just remove the component, and then it's just not tracked anymore. Or I can go through and remove those properties. So it's pretty public. It's not hidden away anywhere.
Excellent. So the next question for the webinar, scrolling through, you guys are giving me all kinds of great questions. Thank you. We're going to start with the ones flagged for discussion, and then we will keep adding as we go. Yusuf asks, any comparisons with other managed localization services? Localized is top of mind.
I'm not familiar with Localize. It's hard to really compare. Like, I don't really want to. I haven't used all of the services enough to be able to compare them. I look at, whenever new ones come out, I look at them to see how they compare, but I don't really want to diss them. I don't know. There's other good solutions out there. I think I think a lot of them have a similar approach to some extent. I haven't seen anything as extensive as the smart strings feature. And I think the localized property variants, I've not seen anything like that at all in Unity. So I think we have a big offering here compared to other packages with that.
Excellent.
We do have asset localization. Sorry, I didn't show it, but it works the same way as strings. You can just change them, or you can do as Andy was doing. You can right click and you can localize textures. And instead of using a localized string, you just use a localized asset. So it works. It's a very similar workflow.
Excellent. Thank you. So I see a clarification on Sven's question, so I'll just read both. So currently not supported ETA, and then clarification, sorry, it was a follow-up to a question about UI Builder, new UI system. So new UI Builder, new UI system currently not supported. What is the ETA?
No, I can't give an ETA on it at the moment, but we plan to be when we come out of preview. We're working with the UI Builder tools team, so we're coming up with a solution. It's going to have to be a little bit different because they don't use like components and that. So we need to find another way to do it, but we will have a solution and an integration, but we're still working on that at the moment.
Excellent, excellent. Alrighty. Sorry, scrolling through, you guys are asking lots of questions. Thank you.
I saw that, sorry, the question I was saying about the assets, I didn't fully answer it. They like to be able to pull them from a cloud or a table. Because we're built on top of addressable assets, you have all of those features. You can have your assets on a cloud. You can have them local. You can add them at a later date. It doesn't have to be all ready when you build the game. You can add language packs, and you can provide custom providers as well for addressable. So if you want to say read a text file that has your language in it, you can create one of them. And we got some samples, and we're going to add more samples on how you can make your own, and we'll add our own as well, so that you don't have to use it asset bundles forever. But yeah, it's very flexible. You can change the sources of the data, and you can change the data types as well.
Excellent. Question from Marcelo: when will this package be available?
Well, it's available now in preview. It's just hidden, as we said. Out of preview, we are looking at 2021.2, so LTS next year. We have a cutoff point. We need to be ready by May, so we should be complete by May, and then we'll just be bug fixing and documentation and finishing things off. I expect the localized property variants probably, well, it's going to need to be before May, so maybe like first quarter of next year is when we're aiming for. But we've got some UX research we're going to do so we want to get a lot of feedback before we land it fully. So that we don't know how long that's going to take at the moment.
Okay. Jean-Francois says, one second here. What if we have thousands of text components for which we'd like to use the same font and scale for specific languages?
What do you mean? Does that, like, you can write scripts if you want to do it differently. So for example, the open projects team, someone recently provided a script that does a font and a string. But if you want to do it to thousands of strings, then you could do it through the localized property variants. If you don't want to manually set them up, you can do it through scripts as well. I guess I would expect you to be able to manually do them. If you've got thousands of them, you're going to have to add them some way. So if you're doing them through script, then you can also set them up through scripts. It doesn't have to be done through the editor.
Okay. Lars asks, is there any built-in solution to update localized text after shipping, or do I need to implement a custom solution? For instance, reading custom asset packages with updated localization tables.
The addressable asset system does have support for doing build afterwards. We haven't added anything custom to do this, but we'll certainly we're going to look into if we need to do anything extra. But a lot of this stuff just comes from part of addressable assets. It's just part of the features it supports, like doing updaters later on. You would just build your addressable assets and then provide the content update packs. But if we can make it easier, then we certainly will try.
Alrighty. Suma asks, will right-to-left languages such as Arabic be supported by the time the package comes out of preview, or will that come down the line?
It's definitely going to come. I can't say when it'll be fully supported because it relies on a few other areas, not just the localization package. There's TextMesh Pro, which I know Stefan is in the chat answering a lot of questions about that. But it's something we need to add. But it's quite a big area because we also need to add the support in the editor itself so that you can work in a nicer way with it. So it'll probably come in bits and pieces over time, not just in one big burst. But it's definitely something we're working on, and we want to have full support for it.
Excellent. So it looks like we have one more question on the board here, and that is, can you let us know how to obtain this recording? We will be sharing this recording. You should get a follow-up email, I believe, with the link.
If you do have any other questions, you can go straight to the forum and ask. I'm pretty quick to respond there. So that's the best place to go is the forum.
And it looks like Anthony's, thank you again for another question. How production ready is it? Do I use it or could it fail?
It's pretty production ready, yeah. Like we are preview, so we can't say you should definitely use it because we have a policy to say you shouldn't use preview packages generally. But as I said, we're coming out of preview soon. All of the features we have now are pretty firm and quite solid, and we've just got some new bits we're going to add, but we're not going to change anything. We're not going to break anything on you. So you are safe to start using it. It depends on your timeline. If you need to have your game out before summer next year, then it will still be in preview. So that's the risk you take. If you've got a longer timeline, then you should be safe to use it.
Excellent. And I see no more open questions at the moment. I'd like to thank everyone for joining. We'll go ahead and close with just a quick demo of the beta, a beta webinar demo that we put together to kind of walks you through the process. And thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, evening, morning, wherever you may be. And we look forward to seeing you online. Cheers.
Thank you.
Should be playing. Come on, play.
And I think that's the end.
Now this is the part.
Is that the end?